single mom waitress helped starving old man, unaware he was Mafia boss's dad. Puddles collected in the uneven cobblestones, catching the flicker of light like tiny stars scattered across the ground. The city was alive in its quiet way, whispers of merchants closing their shops, the creak of shutters in the wind, and the soft footsteps of those who had no home but the night. Alara wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she hurried through the alleyways. Her apron, damp from the drizzle, clung to her like a second skin. The tavern she worked in was a warm refuge, but the walk from her small apartment above the bakery to the streets below was always a reminder of the struggle she lived with each day. Every coin mattered, every meal counted, and every night she prayed her son, little Tomas, was warm under his blanket, safe from the chill that seeped through the walls. As she turned a corner, she noticed him, a frail figure hunched against the brick, shivering beneath a tattered coat. His hair was white, wisps sticking to his pale, weathered face, and his eyes seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 untold stories. Most people would have walked past him, clutching their own troubles tighter, but something stirred in Alara's heart. Perhaps it was the desperation she recognized in his gaze, the same kind of quiet hunger she had faced herself. "Here," she whispered, approaching him with a warm loaf of bread she had hidden under her shawl. "Eat, please take this." The old man looked up slowly, suspicion mingling with exhaustion. His voice was low, gravelly, and yet polite. I don't want to trouble you, child." "You won't," Alara replied softly, kneeling so that her eyes met his. "I can help." He took the bread with trembling hands, staring at it as though it were a treasure beyond measure. The moment stretched between them, a fragile bridge of trust. Then he spoke, almost inaudibly. "Thank you." Alara felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something in his presence that felt different, powerful, though hidden beneath frailty. She shook off the feeling, focusing instead on the warmth of doing something good in a world that often demanded hardness. That night she returned to the tavern, dripping rainwater onto the floor, and quickly wiped her hands on a cloth. The familiar smells of roasted meat and spiced wine greeted her, but her mind lingered on the old man. Why had he been out there in such a state? Where did he come from? And most importantly, would he be safe through the night? Her shift passed in a blur of orders and cleaning. Each smile she offered to a customer was a small mask, hiding the worry that gnawed at her thoughts. By the time she stepped out into the misty street again, the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle. And there he was, the old man, still in the same alley, still shivering, though now wrapped in the meager blanket he had somehow procured. Alara hesitated, then approached him again. "Come with me," she said, holding out her hand. "You can stay dry at my place. There's warm tea and something to eat." He studied her, his eyes searching for a reason to refuse, a reason to escape, but finally he nodded. I will follow you," he said quietly, and for the first time a faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. The small apartment above the bakery was modest. A single room served as both kitchen and living space, with a narrow cot pushed against the wall. Tomas, asleep under a patchwork blanket, stirred at their entry but did not wake. Alara set the old man in a chair near the fire and went to fetch tea and bread. The warmth of the room seemed to seep into his bones, and she noticed, almost against her will, how frail he seemed yet still held a certain dignity. As they ate, he spoke in soft tones, telling her little stories of his travels, carefully avoiding details that might reveal too much. But his voice carried weight, and Alara found herself drawn to the stories, imagining the life behind them. She asked questions and he answered cautiously, revealing snippets of a past that hinted at influence and authority, but nothing concrete. Hours passed. The rain outside stopped, leaving a quiet silence in its wake. Tomas finally stirred, rubbing his eyes, and the old man looked at him with a tenderness that softened his hardened features. Alara watched the scene, heart warming at the sight, yet a part of her could not shake the unease that lingered. There was something in this man's eyes, a storm behind the calm, that suggested the world he had left behind was far more dangerous than her own. The old man finally spoke, his voice a whisper. "You have a good heart, child. The world does not always reward such kindness. But perhaps it should." Alara smiled, unsure whether the words were meant for her or for some unseen fate. She did not realize that this small act of generosity, this simple gesture of humanity, would ripple outward in ways she could never imagine. As the night deepened, a subtle tension hung in the air. She prepared Tomas for bed, kissed him softly, and left him sleeping. Returning to the small table where the old man sat, she found him staring into the fire. His face was calm, but his eyes reflected a storm she could not yet understand. "Will you be all right?" she asked gently. He looked at her, the weight of unspoken memories flickering in his gaze. "I am, more than you know." Alara nodded, unsure of what to say, feeling both a sense of unease and strange comfort. She poured another cup of tea and sat across from him, the firelight dancing on both their faces. Outside, the city slept, unaware of the quiet meeting of two lives that would change everything. The rain had left the streets glistening, and the lanterns cast long, wavering shadows that seemed to whisper secrets to those willing to listen. Then, in a moment that made Alara's heart skip, the old man's eyes glimmered with something unreadable. Gratitude, yes, but also recognition, as if he had found a thread of fate he had not expected. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from the sense that something monumental was quietly unfolding. "Thank you," he said again, softer this time, almost like a prayer. Alara smiled, not fully understanding but feeling the truth of the words. She could not see the life behind the frail figure before her, nor the dangers that lurked just beyond the city's lantern light. She only knew that she had chosen to help, and somehow, that choice had already begun to change everything. And as she finally prepared to rest, the quiet sound of a distant carriage echoed through the empty streets, a reminder that the world outside their little apartment was vast, dangerous, and waiting. In the firelight, the old man closed his eyes, and for a fleeting moment his face seemed younger, more powerful. He whispered words that only he could hear. "Some debts are never forgotten. Some kindness carries a weight heavier than gold." Alara, weary but hopeful, lay down beside her sleeping son, unaware that the simple act of feeding a stranger had begun a chain of events that would shake her world to its core. Outside, the city held its breath. And in the silence, a shadow moved, watchful, patient, and waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Hook cliffhanger. The old man's eyes opened once more, glimmering in the firelight, and Alara had no idea that the fragile figure she had helped was the father of one of the most feared men in the city, a man whose influence would soon cross paths with hers in ways she could never imagine. The morning sunlight crept through the thin curtains of Alara's small apartment, scattering gold across the worn wooden floor. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain that had lingered from the night before. Tomas was already awake, his small feet padding across the room as he reached for his breakfast. Alara moved quietly, careful not to wake the old man sitting in the corner. He was still, head bowed slightly, as if the warmth of the room had softened something deep inside him. Alara poured tea into a chipped cup and placed a slice of bread on the table for him. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the cup. The old man did not look up, yet she felt his gaze. There was a weight in his silence, something unspoken that both intrigued and unnerved her. "You should eat," she said softly. He finally looked up, and for the first time, Alara noticed the depth of his eyes. They were sharp, intelligent, and held a quiet authority, though tempered by age and weariness. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm and deliberate. "You show kindness that is rare." Alara smiled faintly. "I don't know if I'm kind, I just can't ignore someone in need." The old man nodded slowly, as if weighing her words carefully. "Perhaps that is the greatest strength of all, to act when others would turn away. Alara felt a strange warmth at his words. Something about the old man made her feel both protected and unsettled, as though he carried the weight of a world she could not see. Over the next few days, the old man became a quiet presence in her life. He did not ask for much, and he often sat in silence, observing the rhythms of her small apartment and the life she built for herself and Tomas. He did, however, share fragments of stories, tales of distant cities, of people with great power, of battles fought in shadows. Alara listened with fascination, even when she did not fully understand. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops and painted the sky in shades of pink and gray, a soft knock came at the door. Alara opened it to find the old man standing there, cloak drawn tightly around him. "May I walk with you?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. "Walk outside?" Alara asked, surprised. "Yes, I find the streets speak truths that walls cannot." Something in the way he said it stirred curiosity within her, and against her better judgment she agreed. Tomas waved goodbye from the doorway, his small hand clutching her shawl. "Be careful," he said. They stepped into the evening, the streets still wet from rain, lanterns reflecting in puddles like scattered jewels. The city was quieter now, save for the distant clatter of carts and the soft murmur of voices from alleyways. The old man's steps were steady, measured, and Alara felt, for the first time, the presence of someone who commanded attention without speaking. As they walked, he began to speak in low tones, almost as if sharing a secret with the city itself. "There is much in this world that tests the heart. Most people fear the weight of choices they cannot see. But courage comes in the quiet moments when one acts not for glory but for what is right." Alara nodded, feeling an odd connection to his words. She realized she understood them in a way she had never understood anything before. Life had forced her to be brave in small ways, enough to survive, enough to care for Tomas. But she had never considered that courage could also be a gift, a quiet strength that shaped others. The old man stopped at a small bridge overlooking the river. The water flowed swiftly beneath, reflecting the lanterns and moonlight in shimmering patterns. He leaned on the railing, watching the currents, and Alara stood beside him, silent. "You have a rare heart," he said finally, turning to her. "The world may be cruel, but you show it kindness anyway. That is something few can claim." Alara felt a blush creep into her cheeks, but she did not look away. I just try to do what I can, that's all." He smiled faintly, a shadow of a smile, and for a moment the weight of his presence felt gentle rather than imposing. "And yet, your actions ripple further than you imagine." They walked back in silence, the city around them seemingly alive with secrets. Alara's mind kept returning to the old man's words. There was something more to him, something dangerous yet not fully revealed. She felt a mixture of curiosity, admiration, and something else she could not name. Days passed, and the bond between them grew. The old man, whom she began to call Vincenzo, rarely revealed details of his past, but he offered guidance and small gestures of care that touched her heart. He helped her carry groceries, fixed a leaky tap in her apartment, and even brought small, unexpected gifts for Tomas: a wooden toy, a book of stories, simple things that carried profound meaning. One evening, a distant commotion reached the streets outside her apartment. Shouts echoed, and the sound of hurried footsteps pressed against the walls. Alara felt a pang of fear and looked toward Vincenzo. He rose slowly, moving to the window and peering through the blinds. His face tightened, a tension that had been dormant now flickering across his features. "Stay inside," he said softly. "No one must know you are here tonight." Alara obeyed, her heart racing. She watched as he moved quietly, almost as if he belonged to the shadows themselves. She did not understand why she felt both fear and trust at the same time. The man she had come to rely on could be dangerous, she realized, but perhaps only to those who meant harm. The commotion outside eventually passed, leaving only the soft patter of rain returning to the streets. Alara breathed a sigh of relief, though unease lingered in her chest. That night, as she prepared Tomas for bed, Vincenzo spoke from the corner of the room. "You are brave, Alara, braver than you know." She paused, unsure of how to respond. "I just do what I must. It is nothing special." "Nothing special," he repeated, his voice calm but carrying weight. "You risked yourself for another without thought of reward. That is extraordinary." Alara felt warmth in her chest, a mix of pride and embarrassment. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the quiet authority in his gaze, the depth of someone who had lived through more than she could imagine. She felt drawn to him, though she did not fully understand why. Days turned into weeks. Vincenzo's presence became a comforting rhythm in her life, a steady heartbeat against the chaos of the city. He would sit with her as she cooked, listen to her dreams and fears, and offer wisdom in ways that seemed simple but carried profound truths. One evening, as twilight descended and the city glimmered in 1,000 lantern lights, Vincenzo spoke again. "There are forces in this world, Alara, that test more than just courage. They test loyalty, integrity, and the heart itself. You will face them whether you realize it or not." Alara looked at him, curiosity and concern mingling in her gaze. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly, a mysterious curl of lips. "All in good time. The path before you is not ordinary. You have chosen kindness, and the world will respond in ways you cannot yet see." That night she lay awake beside Tomas, thinking of Vincenzo's words. There was a sense of inevitability in them, as if her small acts of care had set something larger into motion. She did not understand what it could be, but a part of her thrilled at the thought. Days later, a messenger arrived at her tavern. A man, tall and shadowed in the lantern light, handed her a sealed note and left without a word. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant and precise. She unfolded it and read, "The old man you aid is not as he seems. Trust him, for he is more than he reveals, but be cautious. You are part of a story far greater than your own." Alara's hand trembled. She looked toward Vincenzo, who sat quietly as if he had expected this moment. His eyes met hers, calm but unreadable, and she felt a shiver run through her. "What does this mean?" she whispered. "It means," he said softly, "that the world is larger than you imagine, and danger and protection often walk hand in hand." The next morning, Vincenzo disappeared for hours. Alara waited, worry gnawing at her chest. When he returned, there was a subtle change in him, a quiet intensity that had not been there before. Something had shifted, and she could feel it in the air. "Who are you?" she asked finally, unable to hold back the question. He met her gaze steadily. "I am someone who has lived in the shadows, someone who has seen power and loss in ways you cannot imagine, but I am also someone who owes a debt and perhaps a chance at redemption." Alara did not fully understand, but she nodded. There was trust in his eyes, and in the gentle way he moved, and she felt herself believing, despite the fear that flickered in her heart. Hook cliffhanger. That evening, as the lanterns flickered in the rain-soaked streets, a pair of silent figures watched the tavern from the shadows. Their intent was unclear, but one thing was certain: Alara and Vincenzo had been noticed. And the quiet world they had begun to build together was about to face its first real test. The city was quieter than usual that evening, as if holding its breath. Lanterns flickered along the cobblestone streets, their light reflecting on puddles left from an afternoon rain. Alara's small apartment felt warmer than the streets outside, but her heart was unsettled. Ever since the mysterious note arrived at the tavern, she could not shake the feeling that the world around her had shifted. Vincenzo had been unusually distant that day. He had risen early, leaving before dawn with no explanation. When he returned hours later, the air around him felt charged, as though he carried invisible storms within him. Alara watched him from across the small table where they had their evening tea. His face was calm, yet his eyes betrayed the weight of something heavy and urgent. "Where have you been?" she asked softly, though a part of her already feared the answer. He hesitated, then sighed. "There are matters that must be handled, things from the past that cannot wait." His voice was steady, but the subtle tension in his jaw hinted at more. Alara nodded, though her curiosity burned. "You could tell me. I want to help if I can." He shook his head slowly. "Some truths are not meant for all ears. Not yet." The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken questions. Alara could sense danger lingering just beyond their apartment walls, and yet she felt drawn to him more strongly than ever. There was a magnetism in Vincennes, a blend of wisdom, power, and quiet vulnerability that both intrigued and frightened her. Later that evening, as Tomas slept soundly in his small bed, Alara and Vincennes stepped out onto the balcony overlooking the city. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain and distant wood fires. The city seemed peaceful from above, but Vincenzo's gaze was focused on something far beyond the rooftops. "There are forces in this city that will not tolerate your kindness," he said finally, breaking the silence. "Not everyone is as you are, Alara. Some see innocence as weakness." "I don't care about weakness," she replied, her voice firm despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "I care about doing what is right." He turned to her, and for a long moment the tension between them was palpable. "And that is what makes you remarkable, but also vulnerable." Alara's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to ask more, to understand the man before her, but she knew some questions could not yet be asked. She simply nodded, feeling both trust and unease ripple through her. That night, a soft knock echoed from the street below. Vincenzo's head tilted slightly, listening. Alara followed his gaze and saw a tall figure in the shadows, silent and deliberate. Vincenzo's hand brushed against her shoulder, a subtle warning, and she felt a shiver run down her spine. The figure approached the balcony steps, but Vincenzo moved swiftly, intercepting him. Their voices were low, controlled, but the edge in Vincenzo's tone left no room for misunderstanding. Alara strained to hear, catching only fragments. "Not your place. She is under protection. You will leave." When the figure finally retreated, Vincenzo turned to her. His expression was calm, but there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke volumes. "There are eyes upon you, Alara. Be careful." "Why? What have I done?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Nothing yet," he replied softly. "But your presence, your courage, it has drawn attention you cannot see." The next days were tense. Alara felt the city around her differently. Shadows seemed deeper, lanterns dimmer, and every passerby a potential observer. Vincenzo, despite his calm demeanor, moved with a silent urgency. He visited often, but always with a careful watchfulness, guiding her through small precautions she did not fully understand. One evening he brought her to a quiet courtyard behind the tavern, away from prying eyes. Lanterns hung in the trees, casting soft golden light across the stone pathway. Vincenzo's presence was commanding, yet gentle, as he spoke. "There is a man," he began, "who has shaped this city with fear and power. His reach is vast, his loyalty to none except his own. He is my son." Alara blinked, startled. The words hung in the air like a sudden storm. She had suspected there was more to Vincenzo than met the eye, but hearing him speak of a son who wielded such influence brought a new layer of tension. "You have a son?" she asked cautiously. "And he rules with fear?" Vincenzo nodded slowly. "Yes." "And he does not yet know of your kindness, nor of the protection you have offered me. That is why I must be careful. You are precious to me, and I cannot allow harm to come to you." Alara felt her heart tighten. The man she had come to trust, the quiet mentor and companion, carried a world of danger she could barely imagine. Yet beneath the fear, a strange admiration blossomed. There was courage in him, yes, but also a capacity for care and love she had not expected from someone so powerful. Days later, Vincenzo left early once again. Alara's worry gnawed at her, and she found herself wandering the streets near the tavern, restless and uneasy. As she passed an alley, a sudden movement caught her eye. Two figures emerged, silent and deliberate. Her heart pounded, but before she could react, Vincenzo appeared, stepping between her and the unknown men with quiet authority. "Leave," he commanded. His voice carried a power that was impossible to ignore. The men hesitated, then retreated, shadows swallowing them once more. Ilara's breath came in short bursts. You saved me," she whispered, her voice trembling. Vincenzo's gaze softened. "You are never alone, Ilara." "Not while I can help it." That night, she lay awake beside Tomas, her mind replaying the events. She thought of Vincenzo's son, of the invisible threads of danger weaving through the city, and of the strange, unshakable connection she felt with the old man. It was as if fate had drawn them together, setting them on a path neither fully understood. Days passed, and the bond between Ilara and Vincenzo deepened. He shared more stories of his past, carefully selecting those that would teach her without revealing too much. She listened, fascinated by the glimpses of a life filled with power, strategy, and loss. Yet even as she learned, she understood that much remained hidden, truths that could not yet be told. One evening, as the city slept under a soft mist, Vincenzo spoke with a rare openness. "I have made mistakes," he admitted quietly, "choices that have caused pain and loss, but your presence, your courage, it reminds me that there is still a path to redemption, even for someone like me." Ilara felt her heart stir. She did not fully understand the weight of his words, but she sensed the sincerity behind them. You can change," she said softly. "It's never too late to do what's right." He looked at her, the depth of his gaze holding both gratitude and longing. "Your faith, it is a gift I did not expect to receive." The next morning, a shadow fell over the tavern. A man in a dark coat lingered nearby, watching, waiting. Vincenzo noticed immediately, moving with silent urgency. He guided Ilara to the back, keeping her shielded from view. The stranger lingered for hours before finally disappearing into the misty streets, leaving a lingering sense of unease. Ilara realized that her simple life had been irrevocably changed. The quiet rhythm of her days, the warmth of her small apartment, and the laughter of Tomas were now intertwined with a world of shadows, power, and unseen danger. And yet, despite the fear, she felt a growing sense of purpose, an understanding that her courage, her kindness, and her heart mattered more than she had ever known. That evening, Vincenzo sat beside her on the balcony, gazing at the lantern-lit streets. "The path ahead is not safe," he said quietly, "but I will stand by you, always." Ilara reached for his hand, her own small and warm against his. "And I will stand by you," she whispered, "whatever comes." A silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken promises and fragile trust. The city stretched out before them, alive with secrets and unseen eyes. And though the night was calm, a sense of inevitability lingered, a reminder that the world outside was vast, dangerous, and full of challenges they had yet to face. Hook cliffhanger. As dawn broke the next morning, Vincenzo received a message sealed with a symbol she did not recognize. His face hardened as he read it, and Ilara noticed, for the first time, a flicker of fear in his eyes. Outside, the city stirred, unaware that the quiet life of a single mother and her son was about to collide with forces far beyond anything she could imagine. The city seemed to hold its breath that morning. The mist clung to the rooftops, softening the sharp edges of the streets. Lanterns flickered weakly in the pale dawn, and the faint scent of wet earth and wood smoke filled the air. Ilara stood by her window, watching the quiet streets, unaware of the tension building just beyond the walls of her small apartment. Vincenzo was unusually silent. He moved with a measured calm, but every gesture carried weight, as if each step was carefully calculated. Ilara noticed the change immediately. She had come to trust his quiet presence, but now a storm lingered behind his eyes, unseen but powerful. "They know," he said softly, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, yet it carried a warning that made her heart tighten. Lorenzo has sent word. They are aware of us, and they will come. Ilara swallowed hard. What will happen? Vincenzo placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We protect what matters. You, your son, and the choices we have made together, but it will not be easy. The hours passed slowly. Preparations were made with quiet urgency. Vincenzo moved through the apartment with precision, checking locks, securing windows, and arranging provisions. Each gesture, though calm, spoke of a life accustomed to danger and careful planning. Ilara followed his lead, her heart pounding, but determined to stand by him. As evening fell, the first shadows of the threat appeared. A carriage rolled silently along the wet streets, and figures cloaked in dark coats moved with deliberate intent toward the tavern below. Vincenzo's eyes narrowed, and a tense calm settled over him. "Stay inside," he instructed. "Do not come out no matter what you hear, trust me." Ilara nodded, though her fear tugged at her chest. She could hear the quiet thrum of horses' hooves, the soft scrape of leather boots against cobblestones, and the distant murmur of voices. The world outside seemed charged with a dangerous energy, invisible yet palpable. Vincenzo moved to meet the approaching figures. Ilara watched from the window, her hands clutching the railing. He stepped into the street, calm and commanding, a presence that seemed larger than life. The strangers halted, uncertain, as if the city itself recognized the weight of his authority. The conversation was quiet, the words measured, but Ilara could see the shift in the men's stance. They hesitated, then retreated into the shadows, leaving the streets still once more. Vincenzo turned back to her, his expression a mixture of relief and lingering tension. "You are safe," he said softly. "For now." Ilara exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her. But the moment of peace was fragile, a reminder that danger lingered, always patient and watchful. The next days were a careful balance of quiet preparation and cautious normalcy. Vincenzo remained close, offering guidance and protection while allowing her moments of ordinary life with Tomas. The bond between them deepened, no longer just a connection of circumstance, but one forged through trust, courage, and shared vulnerability. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the city in shades of gold and crimson, Vincenzo spoke with rare openness. "I have lived a life of shadows," he said, his gaze distant. "I have made choices that caused pain and loss. But your presence, your courage, it reminds me that even someone like me can seek redemption." Ilara felt a warmth in her chest. "You can change," she whispered. "You don't have to carry the past alone. You can make it right." He looked at her, eyes softening. "Your faith, it is a gift I never expected, and yet it is exactly what I need." The following week brought unexpected news. Lorenzo, the son Vincenzo had spoken of, arrived in the city. His reputation was well known, ruthless, commanding, and feared by many. But Vincenzo, despite the years and the distance, met his son not with fear but with calm authority. Ilara watched as father and son spoke in quiet tones. The words were not fully heard, but the gestures, the measured pauses, and the careful attention spoke volumes. Vincenzo was teaching his son, guiding him not just through strategy, but through the power of restraint, compassion, and honor. It was a revelation to Ilara. The man she had come to trust and care for was not simply a figure of authority. He was a mentor, a protector, and now, a bridge between past and future. She realized that the danger surrounding them was only part of the story. The true transformation was within Vincenzo himself, and in the choices he made to shape a better world for those he loved. One evening, Vincenzo took Ilara to the balcony, overlooking the lantern-lit streets. Tomas slept soundly inside, oblivious to the world beyond their apartment walls. The city stretched out before them, alive with quiet energy and distant possibilities. "You have changed my world," Vincenzo said softly. "By your courage, your kindness, and your willingness to trust, You have reminded me that even in darkness there is light. Alara felt tears prick at her eyes. You have done the same for me, she whispered. You've shown me that courage is not just survival. It's love, loyalty, and hope. For a long moment they stood in silence, the city breathing around them. The tension, the danger, and the shadows of the past all seemed to fall away, leaving only the quiet, unspoken connection between them. Days turned into weeks, and the city slowly returned to a fragile peace. Lorenzo, under his father's guidance, began to wield his influence with wisdom rather than fear. Vincenzo, though still vigilant, allowed himself moments of calm and presence with Alara and Tomas. The bonds forged in crisis began to solidify into something enduring, a foundation built on trust, courage, and the recognition of shared humanity. One evening, Vincenzo led Alara to a quiet park beyond the city. Lanterns hung from trees, casting soft reflections on the water of a small pond. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of blossoms. Vincenzo knelt beside the water, watching the ripples spread across the surface. There is a future, he said quietly, that is not defined by fear or power but by choice, and you are part of that future. Alara knelt beside him, taking his hand. I want to help shape it, she said softly. I want to be part of a world where courage, love, and kindness matter. Vincenzo smiled, a rare, unguarded expression. Then we will shape it together. That night they returned to the apartment. Tomas, unaware of the profound shifts around him, slept peacefully. Alara and Vincenzo stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker and the lanterns sway in the soft night breeze. There was a sense of calm, a quiet victory over the dangers that had threatened to consume them. But even in that calm, a promise lingered. A promise that the choices they made, the courage they had shown, and the bonds they had forged would continue to shape the city and their lives in ways both visible and unseen. Weeks later, as the first light of dawn painted the city in soft pink and gold, Vincenzo received a letter. The seal was familiar, yet the contents were different, words of respect, acknowledgement, and a commitment to a new way of life. The balance of power had shifted, but not through fear or force, but through courage, wisdom, and redemption. Alara watched him read the letter, sensing the weight lifting from his shoulders. He looked at her, eyes filled with gratitude and quiet longing. This is only the beginning, he said softly, but it is a beginning filled with hope. Alara smiled, feeling the truth of his words. Then we will face it together, she said, her voice steady, full of courage and determination. And in the quiet morning, as the city stretched awake beneath them, a new chapter began. One not defined by shadows, danger, or fear, but by the choices of two people who had dared to trust, to care, and to believe in the power of redemption. Outside, the streets were alive with possibility. Lanterns flickered, water shimmered in the early light, and the distant hum of the city whispered of futures yet to be written. Alara and Vincenzo stood together, hand in hand, watching as the world slowly turned toward a new dawn. The fire after rain had left the streets shining, and in that glow they found something more precious than safety or power. It was hope, it was courage, it was love. Final hook resolution. As dawn broke fully, Vincenzo leaned close to Alara, whispering, "Even shadows can warm the heart if we dare to carry the light." Alara smiled, her heart steady. Together they faced the future, not as strangers, not as survivors, but as a family forged through courage, trust, and redemption.